The corset dug into Clara's ribs with every breath she tried to take. Her mother's hands worked the laces tighter, yanking them with a practiced violence that made stars burst behind Clara's eyes. "Hold still," Margaret Whitmore hissed. "You want to look presentable, don't you?" Clara didn't answer. Her fingers gripped the bedpost so hard her knuckles went white. The room spun slightly. Lack of air, lack of food, lack of any say in what was happening to her body, her life, her future. There. Her mother stepped back, surveying her work like a sculptor examining marble. "That'll do." Clara caught her reflection in the warped mirror across the room. The dress was red, crimson really, the color of warning signs and stop signals. Her mother had insisted on it. "Hides the flaws," she'd said. What flaws, Clara had wanted to ask. The fact that she had opinions? That she read books? That she'd turned down 2 proposals from men who smelled like whiskey and spoke to her chest instead of her face? The dress was heavy, layers of fabric that weighed her down, made her smaller somehow, even as they puffed out around her like she was something delicate that needed protecting. She wasn't delicate. She'd hauled water, mended fences, broken horses. But none of that mattered now. "Joseph Hartley is a good match," her mother said, adjusting the neckline that Clara had already tried to adjust 3 times. It sat too low. Everything about this dress sat wrong. "His father owns half the county. You should be grateful." Grateful. Clara tested the word in her mouth and found it tasted like copper. She'd met Joseph Hartley exactly once. He'd looked at her the way men looked at livestock at market, assessing value, checking teeth, measuring utility. He was 43. She was 22. He'd been married before. His first wife died in childbirth. His second ran off with a traveling salesman. Clara would be number 3. "I don't want this," Clara said quietly. Her mother's hand cracked across her cheek so fast Clara didn't see it coming. The sting bloomed hot and immediate. "What you want stopped mattering the day your father signed those papers," Margaret said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "The contract is binding. The Hartleys get a wife. We get to keep our land. That's how this works." Clara's father hadn't even come upstairs to see her. He was probably already at the church, making sure everything was in order, that the transaction would go through smoothly. That's all this was. A transaction. A trade. Clara Whitmore in exchange for debt forgiveness and 70 acres of grazing land. The wagon ride to the church was silent except for the creak of wheels and her mother's occasional adjustments to Clara's veil. The whole town would be there. That's how weddings worked in a place like Millfield Creek. Everyone showed up whether they were invited or not, because there wasn't much else to do on a Saturday afternoon, and free food was free food. Clara could see the church steeple rising above the cottonwood trees. White paint peeling in long strips, cross-crooked from last winter's windstorm that nobody had bothered to fix. The bells started ringing as they approached. Each clang felt like a countdown. When the wagon stopped, Clara didn't move. "Get down," her mother said. "I can't breathe in this dress." "You'll breathe fine. Stop being dramatic." But Clara wasn't being dramatic. The corset had shifted during the ride, and now something sharp, a bone, a stay, something, was pressing directly into her lower ribs. Each breath was a conscious effort, a negotiation with her own lungs. Her father appeared at the side of the wagon. Thomas Whitmore was a tall man, gone soft in the middle, from too much sitting and not enough working. He looked at Clara the way he looked at everything lately, with vague disappointment and exhausted resignation. "Time to go," he said. He didn't offer his hand to help her down. Clara gathered the ridiculous volume of her skirts and climbed down herself, nearly tripping on the hem. No one caught her. She steadied herself against the wagon wheel and straightened up. The church doors were open. She could see people inside, packed into the pews, craning their necks to get a look at her. The whispers started immediately. She caught fragments of them on the wind. Finally, getting rid of her, heard she refused 2 other men. Too smart for her own good, that one. Clara's jaw tightened. She'd known these people her entire life, had helped Mrs. Peterson when her husband broke his leg, had taught the Morrison kids to read, had sat with old Mr. Chen during his wife's funeral, and now they were here to watch her get married off like she was livestock, and they were enjoying it. Her father took her arm, his grip just a little too tight. "Smile," he muttered. She didn't. They walked toward the church entrance. Claire's dress was so heavy she could feel it pulling at her shoulders, her back, making each step harder than it should be. The fabric swished against the dirt, picking up dust that would stain the hem. She hoped it did. Hoped it got filthy. The interior of the church was stifling. Too many bodies, not enough air. The afternoon sun came through the windows in thick yellow beams that made everything look hazy and unreal. Claire could smell sweat and perfume and the lilies someone had put up front. Too many of them, too sweet, making her stomach turn. The organ started playing, badly. Mrs. Kowalski had been the church organist for 30 years and had never improved. Everyone stood. Claire's father pulled her forward, down the aisle. She could feel every eye on her, could hear the whispers getting louder, could see the way people leaned toward each other, mouths hidden behind hands. At the front of the church stood Joseph Hartley. He was exactly as Claire remembered. Medium height, thinning hair slicked back with too much pomade, mustache that looked like a caterpillar had died on his upper lip. He wore a black suit that was too tight across the shoulders and too loose at the waist. His eyes were small and close together, and they moved over Clara now with the same assessing quality they'd had the first time they met. But something was different. His expression was off, not nervous Groom off. Something else. Something that made Clara's already twisting stomach drop further. The walk down the aisle felt like it took hours and seconds at the same time. Then she was there, at the front, standing next to a man she didn't know and didn't want to know, while everyone watched and waited. Her father released her arm and stepped back. The Reverend Matthews, who'd baptized Clara, who'd taught her Sunday school, cleared his throat and opened his Bible. His hands shook slightly as he held it. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice thin and reedy in the packed space, "we are gathered here today." Joseph Hartley held up one hand. The Reverend stopped mid-sentence. The church went silent. That particular quality of silence that happens when a room full of people collectively holds its breath. Joseph was staring at Clara, not at her face, at her body, at the dress, at the shape of her beneath all that fabric. His lip curled slightly. "No," he said. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Clara blinked. "What?" "I said no." Joseph's voice was louder now, carrying to the back of the church. "I'm not marrying you." Someone gasped. Clara thought it might have been her mother. "I beg your pardon?" The Reverend looked between them, confused. Joseph turned to address the congregation as if Clara wasn't even there. "I was told I was getting a young woman of good breeding and proper comportment. What I'm looking at is—" He waved a hand at Clara, his face twisting with disgust. "This." "This?" Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. "You're too tall. Your hands are rough. You walk like a farmhand." Joseph was warming to his subject now, enjoying himself. "I saw you climb down from that wagon by yourself like some kind of ranch girl. And that dress—" He made a noise somewhere between a laugh and a snort. "That dress can't hide what's wrong with you." The church erupted. People were talking over each other, some shocked, some delighted by the scandal of it all. Clara could see her mother's face going red, then white, then red again. Her father just stood there, mouth open, apparently unable to form words. Clara's mind had gone very quiet and very clear. "What exactly is wrong with me?" she asked. Joseph looked at her like she was stupid for asking. "You're not suitable. Any man with eyes can see that. I'm not taking damaged goods." Damaged goods. The words hit her like a physical blow. Clara had been called things before. Too opinionated, too independent, too difficult, but never that. Never something that made her sound like a broken tool or a horse with a bad leg. "The contract," her father started. "I don't give a damn about the contract," Joseph snapped. "I'm not marrying her. You can keep your land. I'll keep my dignity." He turned and started walking toward the side exit. The crowd parted for him like he was royalty. He didn't look back. Clara stood there in her red dress, in front of everyone she'd ever known, publicly rejected like she was nothing. The noise in the church was getting louder. Everyone talking at once. She caught pieces of it. Never seen anything like... Poor girl. What will they do now? Always knew she was trouble. Her mother grabbed her arm, nails digging in through the fabric. "Fix this," she hissed. "How?" Clara's voice sounded distant to her own ears. He's gone. Then find another way. We need that land, Clara. We need… Margaret. Her father's voice was quiet but firm. Stop. For once, her mother listened. Reverend Matthews was trying to restore order, holding up his hands, calling for quiet. It wasn't working. The church had descended into chaos, people standing, pointing, arguing about what should happen next. Then a new voice cut through the noise. Silence! Sheriff Bill Calhoun stepped forward from where he'd been standing at the back. He was a big man, gone gray at the temples, with a face that looked like it had been carved from old leather. When he spoke, people listened. Everyone sit down and shut your mouths. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd obeyed. The sheriff walked up the aisle, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He stopped in front of Clara and her parents, pulled out a folded piece of paper from his vest pocket. This, he said, holding it up, is a binding marriage contract between the Whitmore family and the Hartley family, signed, witnessed, and legally registered with the county. Clara's father nodded weakly. Yes, but Joseph just… I'm aware of what Joseph did, the sheriff interrupted. Doesn't change the fact that this contract is still binding. Miss Whitmore here was brought to this church in good faith to fulfill the terms of an agreement. The Hartleys backed out, but the Whitmores still owe. Owe what? Clara asked. The sheriff's eyes moved to her. There wasn't unkindness in them exactly, but there wasn't mercy either. Your family took an advance on this marriage. $500 and the promise of land rights. That money's been spent. The land's been worked. You can't give it back. So what are you saying? Her mother's voice had gone shrill. I'm saying that the contract requires a marriage to take place today. If not to Joseph Hartley, then to someone else. The church went quiet again. You can't be serious, Clara said. I don't make the laws, miss. I just enforce them. The sheriff turned to address the crowd. Any man here willing to take Clara Whitmore as his lawfully wedded wife, the county will transfer the disputed land rights to your name, plus, he paused, 50 head of cattle from the Hartley Ranch as compensation for the inconvenience. Clara felt like she might throw up. You're auctioning me off. I'm fulfilling a legal contract. It's the same thing. No one was looking at her. They were all looking at each other, doing calculations, weighing options. The men in the crowd were looking at her with new interest now, not romantic interest, but economic interest. She was property. She was livestock. She was a business opportunity. I'll consider it, someone called out. Clara turned to see Walter Preston standing up. He was 60 if he was a day, had buried 3 wives already, and had a reputation for being handy with his fists when he drank, which was often. Sit down, Walter, the sheriff said tiredly. You're too drunk to know what you're agreeing to. Walter sat down, grumbling. Anyone else? The sheriff waited. Martin Tucker raised his hand halfway, then lowered it when his wife elbowed him hard in the ribs. The Brennan brothers were whispering to each other, clearly discussing the cattle situation. One of them stood up. How many cattle did you say? James Brennan called out. 50 head. James looked at Clara, then at his brother, then back at the sheriff. And the land? 70 acres already cleared and fenced. The brothers conferred again. Clara watched them discuss her future like she was a horse they were thinking about buying. James shook his head. Too much risk, apparently. They both sat down. More whispers. More calculations. No one was standing up. Clara's cheeks were burning. The corset was still too tight. She couldn't get a full breath. The church was too hot, too crowded, too full of people who were watching her be weighed and found wanting over and over again. Anyone? The sheriff asked again. Silence. Gentlemen, this is a legal matter. Someone has to… No one has to do anything, a voice from the back said. Heads turned. Clara couldn't see who had spoken. The crowd was too thick, the light too hazy. That's not how this works, the sheriff said, irritation creeping into his voice. Seems to me that's exactly how it works. The voice was closer now. Someone was walking up the aisle. You can't force a man to marry someone he doesn't want to marry, even for 50 cattle and 70 acres. The crowd parted. The man who emerged was tall, taller than anyone else in the room, and built like someone who worked for a living. His clothes were clean but worn, dark pants, white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, vest that had seen better days. His face was weathered, tanned from sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent a lot of time squinting at horizons. His hair was dark, a little too long, pushed back from his face. He had a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's attention. They were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they were looking directly at the sheriff, not at her. "Cole Mercer," the sheriff said. "Didn't know you were in town." "I'm not, usually." The man, Cole, stopped a few feet from the front. Was passing through, heard the commotion. "Then you know what's happening here. I know what you're trying to make happen." Cole's voice was quiet, but it carried. "Doesn't mean it's right. It's legal. Legal and right aren't always the same thing." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You got something useful to contribute, or are you just here to philosophize?" Cole didn't answer right away. His eyes finally moved to Clara. She met his gaze and felt something shift in her chest. He wasn't looking at her the way the other men had looked at her, wasn't assessing her value or measuring her usefulness. He was just looking like she was a person, like she had a say in what was happening. Then his eyes moved away, back to the sheriff. "What happens if no one agrees?" Cole asked. "Then the Whitmore family loses everything. The land, the house, probably the livestock to pay back the debt. They'll be ruined." Cole considered this. "And Miss Whitmore? She'll be ruined too. Publicly rejected, family in debt because of her. No one in this county will touch her after today." The sheriff didn't sound happy about it, but he didn't sound particularly bothered either, just stating facts. Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, trying to stop it. Ruined, that's what she'd be. Not because of anything she'd done, but because a man she'd never wanted to marry decided she wasn't good enough, and now no one else wanted her either. "That seems harsh," Cole said quietly. "That's life." "Doesn't have to be." The sheriff frowned. "What are you getting at, Mercer?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. The entire church was holding its breath again. Claire could hear her own heartbeat, loud and fast in her ears. Then Cole said, "I'll marry her." The church exploded. People were shouting, shocked, confused. The sheriff was trying to talk over them. Claire's mother made a noise like a wounded animal. Her father just stared. Clara found her voice. "What?" Cole looked at her again, those gray eyes steady, unflinching. "I said I'll marry you, if you'll have me." "You don't even know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know what's happening here isn't right, and I know what it'll mean for you if no one steps up." "You want the land?" The question came out bitter. "The cattle?" "No." "Then why?" Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply, "Because you deserve better than this." Clara didn't know what to say to that, didn't know what to do with it. This stranger, this man she'd never met, was offering to marry her for no reason she could understand. No profit, no gain, just because he thought she deserved better. It didn't make sense. Nothing about today made sense. "Hold on," the sheriff said. "Cole, you can't be serious." "I am. You live 40 miles from here. You've got that ranch up in the hill country. You barely come to town. Why would you—" "That's my business. The contract specifies, I don't want the land, I don't want the cattle. I want the marriage to be legal and binding, and I want Miss Whitmore to have a choice in what happens to her next. That's all." The sheriff looked like he wanted to argue, but legally he didn't have ground to stand on. The contract required a marriage. Cole was offering one. The specifics about land and cattle were negotiable. "Miss Whitmore?" The sheriff turned to Clara. "Do you consent to this?" Every eye in the church was on her again. Clara looked at Cole Mercer, tried to find some hint of deception in his face, some sign that this was a trick or a trap, or something worse than what was already happening to her, but she couldn't find it. He just stood there, waiting for her answer, like it actually mattered what she said. She thought about Joseph Hartley walking out of the church, about being called damaged goods in front of everyone, about the men who'd weighed her value and decided she wasn't worth it, about her parents, who'd sold her to settle a debt and now looked at her like she'd failed them somehow. She thought about being ruined, about what that word meant for a woman in a town like this. Then she thought about this stranger saying she deserved better. Maybe she didn't believe him. Maybe this was just another trap, a different kind of cage. But it was a cage she was choosing, and that felt like it mattered. "Yes," Clara said. "I consent." Her mother made that wounded noise again. The sheriff nodded slowly. "All right then. Reverend Matthews, you want to do the honors? The Reverend looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 20 minutes. His hands were still shaking as he opened his Bible again. Let's just get through this quickly, he said. Cole stepped forward. Clara turned to face him. Up close, she could see details she'd missed from a distance. A scar through his left eyebrow, calluses on his hands that matched her own. The way he stood very still, like movement was something he rationed carefully. You sure about this? He asked quietly, just for her. Are you? The corner of his mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. No. Honest, at least. The Reverend was talking, rushing through the ceremony like he wanted to get it over with before anyone else could object or something else could go wrong. Clara barely heard him. She was too focused on trying to figure out who this man was, why he was doing this, what he wanted from her. Do you, Cole Mercer, take this woman? I do. Do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man? I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife. No kiss. Cole didn't try, and Clara was grateful for it. They just stood there, two strangers who were now legally bound to each other, while the church erupted into whispers and exclamations, and at least one person, Clara thought it was Mrs. Henderson, openly weeping. The sheriff stepped forward with papers. Need both of you to sign here. Clara signed her name in shaky script. Cole's signature was neat, controlled. The sheriff witnessed it, stamped it, tucked it away. That's it, he said. You're married. Clara waited to feel different. She didn't. Can we leave now? Cole asked. Nothing stopping you. Cole turned to Clara. Do you have anything you need to collect? From your family's house? Clara thought about her room, her books, the quilt her grandmother had made, a few dresses that actually fit. Yes. We'll get them. Come on. He started walking toward the door. Clara followed, her heavy dress dragging behind her. As they passed through the crowd, people pulled back like she might contaminate them. She caught sight of Joseph Hartley standing by one of the windows, watching with his arms crossed and a smug expression on his face, like he'd won something. Clara held her head up and kept walking. Outside, the air was cooler, clearer. She could breathe a little better. Cole had a horse tied up near the far end of the church, a big bay gelding with kind eyes. He untied the reins, but didn't mount yet. Where do your parents live, Xiao? He asked. 2 miles west. The house with the green shutters. He nodded. We'll walk there. Horse can carry your things when we leave. Leave to where? My ranch, up in the hill country. About a day's ride from here. A day's ride. Clara had never been more than 10 miles from Millfield Creek in her entire life. What's it like? She asked. Quiet, remote, hard work. He glanced at her. Not much in the way of company. Sounds perfect. But that almost smile again. We'll see if you still think that in a week. They started walking. Behind them, people were spilling out of the church, still talking, still processing what had just happened. Clara didn't look back. Her feet hurt. The shoes her mother had made her wear were too tight, and she could feel blisters forming. The dress was still too heavy, the corset still too tight. But she was walking away from that church, from Joseph Hartley's rejection, from all those people who'd watched her be auctioned off like cattle. She was married to a stranger, but she was walking away. That felt like something. They walked in silence for a while. Clara kept expecting Cole to say something, to explain himself, to tell her what he wanted, to reveal whatever ulterior motive he must have. Men didn't just marry women they'd never met for no reason. But he didn't say anything, just walked beside her leading his horse, not pushing her to talk or fill the silence. Finally, Clara couldn't stand it anymore. Why did you really do it? She asked. Cole was quiet for several steps. Then, you ever see something happening that you know is wrong, and you know you can stop it, and you know if you don't stop it, you're going to regret it? Yes. That's why. It wasn't much of an answer, but it was something. They reached her parents' house just as the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon. The green shutters her father had painted 3 years ago were already starting to peel. The porch sagged in the middle. It had never been much of a house, but it had been hers. Her parents' wagon was already there. They must have left the church right after the ceremony. Clara stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "I need to go in alone," she said. Cole nodded. "I'll wait here." Clara climbed the steps. The front door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped inside. Her mother was in the kitchen, slamming pots around. Her father sat at the table, staring at nothing. They both looked up when Clara entered. "Come to say goodbye?" her mother asked. Her voice was acid. "Come to get my things." "Your things?" "As if you have any right to anything in this house after what you've done." "What I've done?" Clara's voice rose. "I did exactly what you told me to do. I showed up at that church. I wore the dress. I stood there while you sold me like livestock. What else was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to marry Joseph Hartley. He didn't want me. You heard him. He said I was damaged goods." Her mother's face twisted. "And whose fault is that? If you'd been more agreeable, more feminine, more what? More willing to pretend I'm something I'm not?" Clara was shaking again, but not from fear this time, from anger. Pure, hot anger that she'd been holding back for weeks. "You put me in a dress that I can't breathe in and sent me to marry a man I don't love, and when he rejected me, you blamed me for it. Well, I'm married now. To someone else. The contract is fulfilled. Your debt is settled. You got what you wanted." "We wanted security," her father said quietly. He still wasn't looking at her. "We wanted to know you'd be taken care of. You wanted to get rid of me. Don't pretend it was anything else." Silence. Clara went to her room. It was small, barely big enough for a bed and a trunk, but it had been hers. She opened the trunk and started pulling out clothes, her everyday dresses, worn but serviceable, a winter coat, the quilt, her books, 3 of them, precious and carefully preserved. She could hear her mother in the kitchen, still slamming things. Her father appeared in the doorway. "Clara?" he said. She didn't look up, just kept packing. "This man, Cole Mercer. You don't know him." "I don't know Joseph Hartley either. What's your point?" "My point is," he paused, "be careful." Now Clara did look up. Her father looked old. When had he gotten so old? "Why?" she asked. "You weren't careful with me. I did what I thought was best. You did what was easiest." He flinched. "Good." Clara finished packing. She changed out of the red dress, had to call for her mother to unlace the corset, which was done in furious silence, and put on one of her regular dresses. Brown, simple, with buttons she could manage herself. She could breathe again. She rolled up the red dress and stuffed it in the bottom of her trunk. Maybe she'd burn it later. Maybe she'd keep it as a reminder. She hadn't decided yet. When she came back out to the main room, carrying her trunk and her bundle of quilts and books, her parents were both in the kitchen. Neither of them said goodbye. Clara walked out the door and didn't look back. Cole was exactly where she'd left him, standing with his horse, looking out at the horizon. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "That everything?" he asked. "Yes." He took the trunk from her without asking, secured it to the horse's saddle with practiced efficiency. The bundle of quilts and books went into a saddlebag. "We should go," he said. "Want to put some distance between us and town before dark." Clara nodded. Cole swung up into the saddle, then offered her his hand. She took it, letting him pull her up behind him. She'd ridden double before, knew how to balance, where to hold on. The horse started walking. Clara didn't look back at the house, didn't look back at the town, just held on as they rode west, into the setting sun, toward a future she couldn't predict with a man she didn't know. Behind her, everything she'd ever known was disappearing. Ahead of her, everything was unknown. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something else, something that might have been hope. They rode until the light started dying, the sun bleeding orange and red across the horizon like something wounded. Clara's arms ached from holding on. Her legs cramped from gripping the horse's sides. The brown dress she'd changed into was already dusty, the hem catching burrs and thorns from the brush they passed. Cole hadn't spoken since they left her parents' house. Not a word. Just guided the horse northwest, away from Millfield Creek, toward hills that grew steadily larger against the darkening sky. Clara's mind kept circling back to the church, to Joseph Hartley's face when he'd looked at her, to the way the crowd had gone silent when the sheriff started his auction, to Cole stepping forward when no one else would. She didn't understand it, any of it. "We'll stop soon," Cole said, breaking the silence so suddenly Clara nearly jumped. There's a creek about a mile ahead. Good place to camp. Camp? Clara had assumed they'd reach his ranch before nightfall. Ranch is still another day's ride, maybe more depending on the weather. He glanced back at her briefly. You ever sleep outside? A few times, when we'd take the cattle to summer pasture. He nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. The creek appeared as promised, a thin ribbon of water cutting through a stand of cottonwoods. Cole dismounted first, then helped Clara down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. She caught herself against the horse, willing her muscles to remember how to work. You did good, Cole said. He was already unsaddling the horse, movements efficient and practiced. Most people not used to riding would have complained. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She watched him work instead. He moved with the kind of economy that came from doing the same tasks thousands of times. No wasted motion, no hesitation. There's a bedroll in that pack, he said, nodding toward one of the saddlebags. You can set up wherever looks flat. I'll get a fire going. Clara found the bedroll. It was heavier than she expected, well made. She looked around for a spot that didn't have too many rocks or roots, found a relatively clear patch near the water, and started unrolling it. The quilt from her grandmother went on top. At least she'd have something familiar. By the time she'd finished, Cole had a small fire burning. Not a big one, just enough for warmth and maybe to heat water. He was crouched next to it, feeding it twigs and dry grass with careful attention. You hungry? He asked. Clara realized she was. She hadn't eaten since early morning, and that had only been a piece of bread her mother had forced on her. Yes. Cole dug through another saddlebag and pulled out what looked like dried meat and some hardtack. Not much, but something. He handed her half of it without ceremony. They ate in silence. The meat was tough, salty. The hardtack was exactly as hard as its name suggested. Clara's jaw ached from chewing, but it filled the hollow in her stomach, and that was enough. When they finished, Cole stood and walked to the creek. He came back with his hat full of water, dumped it into a dented tin pot, and set it near the fire. For coffee, he said. If you want it. I want it. While the water heated, Clara pulled off her shoes. The blisters she'd felt forming in the church had burst at some point during the ride. Her stockings were stuck to her heels with dried blood. She must have made some noise because Cole looked over. Bad? He asked. I'll live. He stood, went back to the saddlebags, and returned with a small cloth bundle. He tossed it to her. Inside was a tin of something that smelled like pine and grease. Salve, he said. For the blisters. Clean them first. Clara looked at him, then at the creek, then back at him. I'll stay by the fire, Cole said, understanding without her having to ask. Give you privacy. He turned his back and busied himself with the coffee. Clara went to the creek, hiked up her skirt, and peeled off the ruined stockings. The water was cold enough to make her gasp. She washed the blood and dirt from her feet, wincing when the current hit the raw skin. When she was done, she dried off with her petticoat. It was already filthy anyway, and applied the salve. It stung, then cooled. Better. She walked back to the fire. Cole was pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. It smelled bitter and strong and perfect. Thank you, Clara said, taking the cup he offered. For what? The salve. Turning your back. Not... She paused, trying to find the right words. Not treating me like I'm fragile. Cole took a sip of his coffee. You don't seem fragile. You don't know me well enough to know what I seem like. I know you didn't cry when that man rejected you in front of everyone. I know you stood up straight while they auctioned you off. I know you walked 2 miles in shoes that were tearing your feet apart and didn't complain once. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. That's not fragile. Clara didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know what to do with being seen like that, clearly, accurately, without judgment. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask. Don't know if I'll answer. Fair enough. Clara took a breath. In the church, you said you didn't want the land or the cattle. If that's true, what do you get out of this? Out of marrying me? Cole was quiet for a long time. He stared into the fire, his face unreadable in the flickering light. I get to sleep at night, he finally said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Clara wanted to push, to demand a real explanation, but something in his voice stopped her. There was a finality to it, a closed door she didn't yet have the key to. So instead she asked, "What's your ranch like?" This apparently was safer territory. Cole's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Small, about 300 acres, mostly grazing land. I've got cattle, maybe 40 head right now, some horses. A garden that barely produces because the soil's rocky, and I don't know much about growing things." He paused. "House needs work. Roof leaks in 2 places. Porch step is rotted through. It's not—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "It's not what you're used to." Clara almost laughed. "I lived in a house with peeling shutters and a sagging porch. My father hasn't fixed anything in 5 years. Trust me, I'm not used to much. Still, it's rough living. Closest neighbor is 12 miles away. Town is even farther. We get snowed in most winters. If something breaks, you fix it yourself or you live without it." "Why do you live out there?" "Because no one bothers me." Another closed door. Clara was starting to recognize them. She sipped her coffee and watched the fire. Sparks rose up into the darkness, disappearing into the stars. The night was full of sounds, crickets, the creek, the horse moving in the brush somewhere behind them. It should have felt strange, sleeping outside with a man she didn't know. It should have scared her. It didn't. Maybe she was too tired to be scared. Maybe too much had already happened today. Or maybe, and this was the thought that kept circling back, maybe Cole Mercer was the first person in a long time who treated her like her choices mattered. "I should tell you," Cole said, interrupting her thoughts, "this marriage doesn't have to be—" He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm not expecting anything from you. As a wife. You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't—" Another pause. "I won't bother you." Clara understood what he was trying to say, and she appreciated the awkwardness of it, appreciated that he was trying to reassure her. "Okay," she said simply. He looked relieved. They finished their coffee in silence. When the fire started to die down, Cole banked it carefully, making sure it wouldn't spread but would last through the night for warmth. "You should sleep," he said. "We'll head out at first light." Clara went to her bedroll. She lay down on top of the quilt, still fully dressed except for her shoes, and stared up at the stars. There were so many of them out here, away from town, thick swaths of light across the black. She could hear Cole settling in on the other side of the fire, could hear his breathing even out as he fell asleep with the ease of someone used to sleeping on the ground. Clara thought she'd lie awake all night, thought her mind would race, replaying everything, worrying about what came next. Instead, she fell asleep within minutes, exhausted and strangely at peace. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Cole moving around the camp. The sky was just starting to lighten, everything still gray and indistinct. Clara sat up, her body stiff and aching in new places. Cole was already dressed, already had the fire going again, already had coffee brewing. "Morning," he said when he noticed she was awake. "Morning." Clara's voice was rough. She cleared her throat. "There's water in the pot if you want to wash up. We'll eat something quick, then get moving." They fell into an efficient rhythm. Clara washed her face and hands in the creek while Cole saddled the horse, then they switched. Breakfast was more dried meat and hardtack. Clara was already sick of it, but she ate without complaining. When they were ready to leave, Cole helped her up onto the horse again. Her legs protested, muscles sore from yesterday's ride, but she settled in behind him and tried to find a position that didn't make everything hurt. They rode through the morning as the sun climbed higher. The landscape was changing, becoming more rugged. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills, then to steeper terrain with rocky outcroppings and sparse trees. The air was cooler up here, drier. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horse. Clara slid down and immediately had to grab onto the saddle to keep from falling. Her legs were shaking. "You need to walk a bit," Cole said. "Keep the blood moving." He was right. Clara forced herself to walk in circles around the small clearing where they'd stopped, willing her muscles to loosen up. It helped, but not much. Cole was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "What?" Clara asked. "You're tougher than you look." "That's the second time you've said something like that. Do I look particularly soft?" "You look like a woman who was raised to marry well and run a household, not like a woman who can ride all day without complaint." "Shows what you know," Clara said. I can't run a household worth a damn, but I can ride, rope cattle, mend fence, and break a horse if I have to. My father needed sons. He got me instead, so I learned. Cole's expression shifted. Something that might have been respect. Why'd he marry you off then? If you were useful. Because he owed money, and I was the only thing he had worth trading. Clara heard the bitterness in her own voice and didn't try to hide it. Turns out, I wasn't even worth that. You're worth more than you think. You don't know me well enough to know what I'm worth. Keep telling me that, Cole said. Doesn't make it less true. They mounted up again and kept riding. The hills grew steeper. The path, if you could call it that, became rockier, harder to navigate. Cole guided the horse with practiced ease, taking his time, not pushing. Clara's mind wandered. She thought about her mother's face in the kitchen, furious and disappointed. Thought about her father, who couldn't even look at her when she left. Thought about the town she'd grown up in, the people who'd watched her be humiliated and done nothing. She didn't miss any of it. That realization should have scared her. Instead, it felt like relief. Late afternoon, they crested a ridge and Cole pulled the horse to a stop. There, he said, pointing. Clara followed his gesture. Below them, in a valley carved between two rocky hills, sat a small ranch. A house, single story, wood construction, smaller than she'd expected. A barn that looked sturdier than the house. A corral with a few horses. Cattle scattered across the grazing land beyond. It was isolated, remote, the kind of place you'd only find if you knew where to look. It looked like freedom. That's home, Cole said. There was something in his voice, not quite pride, but maybe satisfaction, like he'd built something here and it mattered. They rode down into the valley. As they got closer, Clara could see what Cole had meant about the house needing work. The roof sagged in places. One of the shutters hung crooked. The porch did indeed have a rotted step. She could see the gap in the wood from here. But the barn looked solid. The fences were well maintained, the cattle looked healthy. Whatever else was true, Cole knew how to work a ranch. He stopped the horse in front of the house and dismounted, then helped Clara down. Her legs were beyond protesting now. They just gave up entirely. She would have fallen if Cole hadn't caught her. Easy, he said. His hands were steady on her arms, holding her upright until she found her balance. Sorry, I'm not usually this useless. You're not useless. You're tired. There's a difference. He released her once he was sure she could stand. Come on, I'll show you inside. The house was dim and cool after the bright afternoon sun. Claire's eyes took a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw a single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once. A fireplace at one end. A rough-hewn table with two chairs, cabinets that looked handmade, uneven but functional. A stove that had seen better days. Two doors led off the main room. Cole gestured to one. That's my room, he said. Then he pointed to the other. That one's yours. Clara walked to the second door and pushed it open. Inside was a small room, barely bigger than the one she'd had at her parents' house. A bed frame with a thin mattress. A trunk at the foot of the bed. A single window that looked out toward the hills. It was sparse. Nearly empty. It was hers. I know it's not much, Cole said from behind her. I can build some shelves if you want, for your books. Clara turned to look at him. He was standing in the doorway, not entering her space, waiting for her response. It's perfect, she said. He looked surprised. You don't have to say that. I'm not. It's mine, isn't it? That makes it perfect. Something shifted in Cole's expression. He nodded once, then stepped back. I'll get your things from the horse. You should rest. He disappeared before Clara could respond. She heard him outside, talking quietly to the horse, the sounds of bags being unpacked. Clara sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was lumpy but clean. Through the window, she could see the hills turning golden in the late afternoon light, could hear the cattle lowing in the distance, could smell sage and dust, and something else, something that smelled like possibility. Cole brought her trunk and her bundle of quilts. He set them down just inside her door without entering the room. I need to tend to the livestock, he said. Check on things. You can settle in. There's food in the cabinet if you're hungry, water in the barrel by the door. Do you need help? He paused. You know how to milk a cow? Yes. Then, yeah, I could use help, but not today. Today you rest. He turned to leave, then stopped. Clara? Yes? I'm glad you're here. He said it simply, like it was a fact, then walked out. Clara sat in her new room in her new house in this remote valley and tried to figure out what she felt. Relief? Fear? Confusion? All of it, maybe. None of it quite fit. She unpacked her trunk slowly, hung her few dresses on pegs Cole had hammered into the wall, put her books on the windowsill for now, spread her grandmother's quilt over the bed. When she was done, the room looked lived in. Looked like someone actually stayed here. Looked like a room that belonged to someone, not a cage. Clara walked back out to the main room. Through the window, she could see Cole in the corral with the horses. He was checking their hooves, running his hands along their legs, looking for problems. The way he moved around them was gentle, confident. The horses trusted him. She wondered what it would take for her to trust him. Time, probably. Lots of it. Clara found the food cabinet. Inside were basics: flour, salt, coffee, beans, a jar of preserves that looked homemade. She started taking stock of what was there, what she could make with it. Her mother had taught her to cook, at least. That was something useful. By the time Cole came back inside, Clara had water heating on the stove and was assessing the state of the pantry. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Figuring out what we have for dinner." "I told you to rest." "I'm not good at resting. Rather be useful." Clara turned to face him. "Unless you prefer I don't touch your kitchen?" "It's your kitchen too now." "Then I'm making dinner. Do you like beans?" Cole's mouth twitched in that almost smile. "I eat beans pretty much every night, so I guess I better like them." Clara found a pot and started soaking the dried beans. Cole watched her for a moment, then went to clean up. When he came back, his face and hands were scrubbed, his hair wet and slicked back. They moved around each other in the small space with surprising ease. Clara cooked. Cole set the table. 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 cups. Nothing fancy, nothing extra. When the beans were done, Clara added some of the preserves, apricot, she thought, and a bit of salt. It wasn't much, but it smelled good. Better than hardtack anyway. They sat down to eat. Cole took a bite, then looked at her with genuine surprise. "This is good." "You sound shocked." "I am. I thought I was doomed to eat my own cooking for the rest of my life." "How long have you lived out here alone?" 3 years. "And before that?" Cole's expression closed off. "Another door." "Before that was before that." Clara let it go. She was getting used to the doors, learning which ones might open eventually and which ones were locked tight. They ate in comfortable silence. When they finished, Clara started to clear the plates, but Cole stopped her. "I'll do it," he said. "You cooked." "We can both do it." "Fine." They washed the dishes together. Clara washed, Cole dried. It was domestic in a way that should have felt strange, but didn't. It felt normal, natural. When everything was clean and put away, Cole added wood to the stove and checked the damper. "Gets cold at night up here," he said. "Even in summer. You've got extra blankets in that trunk if you need them." "Thank you." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, neither quite sure what came next. Finally, Cole said, "I usually turn in early. Sunup comes fast." "I'll probably do the same." "All right then." He hesitated. "Clara?" "Yes?" "If you need anything, during the night, or any time, just—" He gestured vaguely. "Just say something. I'm a light sleeper." "Okay." "Okay." He nodded, then disappeared into his room, closing the door behind him. Clara went to her own room. She changed into her nightdress, plain cotton, worn soft from years of washing, and climbed into bed. The mattress was lumpy, but the quilt smelled like home, and that helped. She lay in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this new place. The wind against the walls, mice or maybe rats in the ceiling, the distant call of an owl. She thought about how this morning she'd woken up in her parents' house, expecting to marry Joseph Hartley. Thought about how that life, the one she'd been headed toward, had exploded in the span of an hour. Thought about Cole Mercer stepping forward when no one else would. She still didn't understand it, didn't understand him, but she had time now. Time to figure it out. Time to figure out who she was in this new place, this new life. For the first time in months, Clara felt like she could breathe all the way down to the bottom of her lungs. She fell asleep to the sound of the wind and woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee. When she emerged from her room, Cole was already up, already dressed, already had breakfast started. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Morning? You always wake up this early?" "Cows don't care if you're tired. They want to be fed." Clara found this funny for some reason. She poured herself coffee and watched Cole work. He moved through the kitchen with the same efficiency he did everything else. No wasted motion, no hesitation. "I meant what I said yesterday," Clara said, "about helping. I'm not going to just sit around." Cole glanced at her. "I believe you, but maybe give yourself a day or two to settle in first." "I'm settled." "You just got here yesterday." "And I'm settled, so what needs doing?" Cole studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "All right, after breakfast, we'll check the cattle. Make sure none of them wandered off or got hurt. Then there's fence that needs mending on the south pasture, chickens to feed, garden to weed, though I'm pretty sure the weeds are winning that battle." "Sounds like a full day." "Every day's a full day out here." They ate quickly, scrambled eggs that were slightly burned and more of that endless coffee. Then Clara changed into her oldest dress, the one she used for hard work, and followed Cole outside. The morning was cool and clear. The sun was just clearing the eastern hills, painting everything gold and pink. Clara paused for a moment, just taking it in. The quiet, the space, the sheer bigness of the sky. "Pretty, isn't it?" Cole said. "Yeah, it really is." They spent the morning riding the property line, checking on cattle. Cole taught her the brand to look for, a simple CM burned into the hide. Showed her which cows were likely to calve soon, which ones had a tendency to wander. He talked more out here, with the cattle, than he did in the house. Like being outside made words easier. Clara asked questions. Cole answered them. They fell into a rhythm. By midday, they'd counted all the cattle and found them healthy. They rode back to the house for a quick lunch, then headed out to the south pasture where the fence needed work. The problem was obvious. A section of posts had rotted through, and the wire was sagging. Cole had already cut new posts. Now they just needed to be set. "You ever done this?" he asked. "Once or twice. I'm better at it than my father." "Low bar?" "Very low bar." They worked together. Clara held the posts steady while Cole drove them into the ground with a heavy mallet. Then they strung new wire, pulling it tight, securing it with practiced hands. It was hard work, hot work, but there was something satisfying about it, something real. By the time they finished, the sun was starting its descent. Clara's hands were blistered, her back ached, her dress was filthy. She felt great. Cole looked at her, taking in her disheveled state, and that almost smile appeared again. "What?" Clara asked. "Nothing. Just, you weren't lying. You do know how to work." "Told you." "Yeah, you did." They rode back to the house as the sky turned orange and purple. Claire was so tired she could barely stay upright in the saddle, but it was a good tired, an earned tired. She made dinner again, this time adding some wild onions Cole had shown her near the creek. He seemed genuinely pleased by this addition, which made Clara feel absurdly proud of herself. After dinner, they sat outside on the porch. The rotted step creaked under Clara's weight, but it held. Cole leaned against the railing, looking out at the darkening hills. "This is nice," Clara said. "What is?" "This. All of it. Working, being useful, not having to pretend to be something I'm not." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You don't have to pretend here, ever. Just be yourself. That's enough." Clara looked at him, really looked at him. He meant it. She could see it in his face, hear it in his voice. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For stepping up. In the church. You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did." "Why?" Cole stared out at the hills for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost too quiet to hear. "Because I know what it's like to be looked at like you're less than human. To have people decide your worth based on things you can't control. And I know what it does to you when no one steps in." He paused. "I couldn't watch it happen to someone else. Not when I could stop it." Clara waited for him to say more, but he didn't. Just stood there, shoulders tight, jaw set. She wanted to ask about his past, wanted to know what had happened to him, what had carved those lines around his eyes and taught him to close doors so completely. But she didn't ask, because she understood now. The doors would open when they were ready. Maybe never. Either way, it wasn't her choice to make. "Well," she said instead, "I'm glad you did. Step in, I mean." Cole nodded once. Then he straightened up. "I'm heading to bed. Early start tomorrow." "What's tomorrow?" "Same as today. Cattle, fences, whatever breaks that needs fixing." "Sounds perfect." He looked at her like he was trying to figure out if she was being sarcastic. When he realized she wasn't, that almost smile appeared again. "Yeah," he said. "It kind of is." He went inside. Clara stayed on the porch a little longer, watching the stars emerge one by one. The air smelled like sage and dust and grass. An owl called from somewhere in the cottonwoods. She thought about her old life, about the church, about Joseph Hartley's rejection. It all felt very far away, like it had happened to someone else. Clara went inside, washed up, and climbed into bed. Sleep came quickly, heavy and dreamless. When she woke the next morning, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The days fell into a pattern that Clara found herself clinging to like a lifeline. Wake before dawn, coffee with Cole in the quiet kitchen, neither of them talking much because the silence felt right. Then out to the animals, feeding, watering, checking for injuries or illness. The work was constant, physical, demanding. Clara loved every minute of it. 3 weeks passed before she realized she hadn't thought about Millfield Creek in days. She was mending a harness in the barn when the realization hit. Her hands stilled on the leather, needle poised mid-stitch. She'd been so focused on learning the rhythms of the ranch, on proving to Cole, and maybe to herself, that she could handle this life, that her old life had simply faded into background noise. "You all right?" Clara looked up. Cole was standing in the barn doorway, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. He'd been shoeing one of the horses in the corral. "Fine," she said. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how I don't miss home. Is that wrong?" Cole walked into the barn, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Don't see how. From what you've told me, there wasn't much there to miss." He had a point. Clara went back to her stitching. Cole sat down on a hay bale nearby, close enough to talk, but far enough to give her space. That was his way. Always careful about distance, about boundaries. "I was thinking," he said after a moment, "we should go into town next week, stock up on supplies before winter." Clara's hand stilled again. "Town?" "Little place called Ridgeway, about 15 miles west. Nothing like Millfield Creek. Maybe 200 people. Most of them keep to themselves. But they've got a general store, a smithy, post office. Do we have to?" Cole studied her. "You planning to never leave this ranch again?" The thought had crossed my mind. "Clara, I know we need supplies." She set down the harness. "I just don't want to deal with people staring, judging, asking questions. They won't. You don't know that." "I do, actually. People in Ridgeway don't care about your business. They barely care about their own." Cole leaned back against the barn wall. "Besides, you can't hide forever. Eventually you have to face the world again." "I'm not hiding." "Then what do you call this?" Clara wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Because he was right. She was hiding. Had been since she got here. Not from him. She'd grown comfortable with Cole, had learned to read his silences and his rare moments of conversation. But from everyone else. From the possibility of more judgment, more rejection. "Fine," she said. "We'll go to town. But if anyone asks questions, they won't. And if they do, you don't owe them answers." That helped, somehow. The idea that she could just refuse to explain herself. They went back to work. Clara finished the harness. Cole finished the horse. The sun tracked across the sky like it always did, indifferent to human worry. That evening, Clara tried to fix the leak in the roof. She'd been watching water drip into a bucket in the corner of the main room for weeks now, and she was tired of listening to it. "You're going to fall and break your neck," Cole said from below. He was holding the ladder steady while Clara balanced on the roof with a hammer and some spare shingles he'd found in the barn. "I'm not going to fall." "That's what everyone says right before they fall." "Do you want this fixed or not?" "I want you to not die." "Noted." Clara found the gap where the shingle had come loose. She pried it up carefully, checked the wood underneath. Rotted, of course. Nothing on this ranch was simple. "It's worse than I thought," she called down. "How much worse?" "Needs new planking. This whole section is soft." Cole cursed under his breath. "All right, come down. We'll deal with it properly when we get back from town." Clara climbed down the ladder, pleased with herself despite the bad news. At least she'd identified the problem. That was something. Cole was looking at her with an expression she'd seen before but couldn't quite name. Something between exasperation and amusement. "What?" she asked. "You've got tar in your hair." Clara reached up. Sure enough, her fingers came away black and sticky. "Damn." "Come on, I'll help you get it out before it sets." They went inside. Cole heated water while Clara tried unsuccessfully to comb the tar out with her fingers. When the water was warm, he poured it into a basin and handed her a rag, and some of the harsh lye soap they used for everything. "This is going to hurt," he warned. He wasn't wrong. Clara scrubbed at her hair until her scalp burned and her eyes watered. The tar came out in sticky clumps, taking some of her hair with it. "Here." Cole took the rag from her. "Let me." Clara started to protest, then stopped. His hands were gentle, careful. He worked the soap through the tarred section methodically, patient when she winced. "Sorry," he muttered. "It's fine. I'm the idiot who got tar in her hair." "You were trying to fix the roof. That's not idiotic." "It is if I don't know what I'm doing." "You knew enough to identify the problem. That's more than most people would do." He rinsed her hair with clean water. "There, got most of it." Clara squeezed the water out of her hair, which now felt like straw. "Thanks." "Don't mention it." But there was something in the air between them now, something that hadn't been there before, an awareness. Clara felt it in the way Cole's fingers had moved through her hair, in the way he'd stood close enough that she could smell the leather and wood smoke scent that seemed to follow him everywhere. She stepped back, put distance between them. Cole noticed but didn't comment, just emptied the basin outside and came back in like nothing had happened. That night, Clara lay in bed and thought about those few minutes in the kitchen, about how natural it had felt to let Cole help her, how she'd wanted to lean into his touch instead of away from it. It scared her. Not because she thought Cole would hurt her, but because she was starting to care what he thought, starting to want things she had no business wanting from a marriage that was supposed to be practical, not personal. She pushed the thoughts away and forced herself to sleep. The day they were supposed to leave for Ridgeway, Clara changed her dress 3 times before settling on the brown one she'd worn the day she left Millfield Creek. It was practical, unremarkable, the kind of dress that wouldn't draw attention. Cole watched her fuss with her hair. She was trying to pin it up in a way that would hide the section she'd had to cut short because of the tar, and finally said, "You look fine." "I look like I've been living in a barn for a month." "You have been living in a barn for a month. Well, near one anyway." "That's not helping," Cole sighed. "Clara, no one is going to care what you look like, I promise." She wanted to believe him. Got on the wagon anyway, hands twisted together in her lap. The ride to Ridgeway took most of the morning. The town appeared gradually, a cluster of buildings in a shallow valley, smoke rising from a few chimneys. It was smaller than Millfield Creek. Like Cole had said, quieter. They pulled up in front of the general store. A few people were on the street, but no one paid them particular attention. Clara felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "See," Cole said quietly. "Told you." They went inside. The store was dim and cramped, shelves packed with everything from fabric to farming equipment. An older woman stood behind the counter reading a newspaper. She looked up when they entered. "Cole Mercer, haven't seen you in months." "Been busy, Mrs. Chen." The woman's eyes moved to Clara. There was curiosity there, but not judgment. "And who's this?" "My wife, Clara." If Mrs. Chen was surprised, she hid it well. "Didn't know you'd gotten married. Congratulations." "Thank you," Clara managed. "What can I help you folks with today?" They spent the next hour gathering supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, salt, lamp oil, nails, wire for the fences. Mrs. Chen wrapped everything efficiently, chatting about the weather and the upcoming harvest, but never once asking personal questions. Clara started to relax. When they'd loaded everything into the wagon, Cole said, I need to stop by the smithy. You want to come or wait here? I'll come. They walked down the dusty street together. A few people nodded at Cole in passing. One man, grizzled and weathered, stopped to shake his hand. Good to see you, Cole. You too, Frank. The man glanced at Clara but didn't ask, just tipped his hat and moved on. The smithy was at the far end of town, a low building with a forge that radiated heat even from outside. The smith was a massive man with arms like tree trunks and a face that had clearly lost a few arguments with hot metal. Cole, he said when they walked in. His voice was surprisingly soft for someone his size. Need something fixed? Just checking on that order I placed. The hinges for my barn door. Right. Got 'em finished last week. The smith disappeared into the back and returned with a pair of heavy iron hinges. These should hold whatever you throw at them. Appreciate it. Cole paid him, and they headed back to the wagon. Clara was starting to think this trip might actually be okay when she saw them. Two women standing outside what looked like a boarding house, watching her and Cole. They weren't being subtle about it. One of them whispered something to the other, and they both turned to stare more openly. Clara's stomach tightened. Cole noticed. Ignore them. They're staring. So, let them stare. But Clara couldn't ignore it. Couldn't help feeling like she was back in that church, being examined and found wanting. One of the women started walking toward them. She was young, maybe Clara's age, with blonde hair and a dress that was far too nice for a town like Ridgeway. Cole Mercer, she said, her voice carrying a note of familiarity that made Clara's jaw tighten. It's been a while. Sarah. Cole's tone was neutral, careful. The woman, Sarah, looked at Clara with undisguised interest. And this must be the wife I've been hearing about. News travels fast, Cole said. In a town this size? Always does. Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I have to say I was surprised. Never thought you'd settle down. Things change. Apparently. Sarah's gaze swept over Clara, assessing. Where are you from? Does it matter? Clara asked before she could stop herself. Sarah's smile faltered. I was just making conversation. Well, don't. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Sarah's expression hardened. Rude, she muttered, turning on her heel and walking back to her friend. Cole let out a breath. That was... I don't care, Clara said. She climbed up into the wagon seat. Can we go now? Cole didn't argue. Just climbed up beside her, took the reins, and guided the wagon out of town. They were a mile down the road before he spoke. You want to talk about it? No? Sarah was just... I said no. Cole fell silent. Clara stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, furious at herself for losing her composure, for letting one nosy woman get under her skin. After a while, Cole said quietly, For what it's worth, I thought you handled that just fine. Clara looked at him. I was rude. She was prying. There's a difference. You know her. It wasn't a question. Cole's hands tightened on the reins. Yeah, he admitted. There was a time when I thought... He stopped, frustrated. It was a long time ago, before I bought the ranch, before I decided I wanted to be alone. What happened? She wanted things I couldn't give her. A nice house in town. Social standing, respectability. He glanced at Clara. I wanted to disappear into the hills and never deal with people again. Wasn't much room for compromise. Clara thought about that. About Cole choosing solitude over companionship. About what that said about him. And about what he'd given up to marry her. Do you regret it? She asked. Being stuck with me instead? Cole pulled the wagon to a stop. Turned to face her fully. I'm not stuck with you, he said. And no, I don't regret it. Not for a second. Why not? Because you don't want me to be something I'm not. You don't push me to talk when I don't want to talk, or socialize when I'd rather be alone. You work hard, you don't complain, and you're the first person I've met in years who doesn't make me feel like I have to perform some version of myself that fits what they expect. He paused. So, no, Clara. I don't regret marrying you. Do you regret marrying me? Clara thought about the church, about Joseph Hartley, about her parents' house and the life she'd been headed toward. Then she thought about the ranch, about waking up to coffee and quiet, About working until her muscles ached and feeling satisfied instead of exhausted. About Cole teaching her to rope cattle and fix fences and all the things she'd wanted to learn but never had the chance. "No," she said. "I don't regret it either." Something passed between them. An understanding. A recognition of what they'd built together, even if neither of them quite knew what to call it. Cole clicked his tongue at the horses, and they started moving again. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Clara said, "I'm sorry I snapped at her." "Don't be. She had it coming. Still, I could have handled it better." "Maybe. But sometimes people need to be told to mind their own business. Nothing wrong with that." Clara smiled despite herself. "You really don't care what people think, do you?" "Haven't in a long time. Life's easier that way. Teach me how." Cole looked at her. "You're already learning. You just don't know it yet." When they got back to the ranch, they unloaded the supplies in silence. Clara's mind was still turning over the encounter with Sarah, trying to figure out why it had bothered her so much. It wasn't jealousy. At least she didn't think it was. More like the reminder that Cole had a life before her. People who knew him in ways she didn't. A past she wasn't part of. She was putting away the flower when Cole came up behind her. "Clara?" She turned. He was standing closer than usual, his expression serious. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About Sarah. About why things ended." "You don't have to." "I do. Because if we're going to make this work, this marriage, this partnership, whatever it is, you deserve to know." Clara waited. Cole took a breath. "I was engaged to her 5 years ago, had the ring, had plans to build a house in town, the whole thing. Then my brother died." Clara hadn't known he had a brother. Cole never talked about family. "He was killed," Cole continued, his voice flat and controlled. "Shot by a man who thought he'd cheated at cards. It was stupid, pointless, and I couldn't—" He stopped. "I couldn't stay in that town. Couldn't pretend to care about social gatherings and house plans when my brother was dead over a card game. So I broke the engagement, sold everything, bought the ranch, and moved as far away from people as I could get." "Cole, Sarah didn't understand. She thought I was being dramatic. Thought I'd get over it and come back. But I never did, and eventually she stopped waiting." He looked at Clara. "So when you ask why I stepped up in that church, why I married you, it's because I know what it's like to have your life decided by other people. To be powerless. I couldn't save my brother, but I could help you, and that mattered." Clara felt something crack open in her chest. She'd been living with this man for weeks, working beside him, building something with him. But this was different. This was trust. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "About your brother." "Me too." They stood there in the kitchen, supplies half unpacked, the afternoon light slanting through the window. Clara wanted to say something profound, something that would convey what his honesty meant to her. But the words wouldn't come. So instead she did something she'd been wanting to do for days. She closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him. Cole stiffened for a moment. Then his arms came up slowly, carefully, and he hugged her back. They stood like that for a long time, long enough that Clara could feel his heartbeat against her cheek, long enough that the warmth of him seeped through her dress. When they finally pulled apart, Cole's eyes were bright, and Clara's throat was tight. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me. Thank you for listening." They finished unpacking in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Warmer, fuller. That night, they sat on the porch again. The sky was clear, stars so thick they looked like spilled salt. Clara had brought her grandmother's quilt outside, wrapped it around her shoulders against the chill. "Winter's coming early this year," Cole said. "Can feel it." "How can you tell?" "The way the wind smells, how early the sun sets. Animals are storing more food than usual." He gestured toward the hills. "We'll be snowed in by November, probably. Maybe sooner." "What do we do until then?" "Get ready. Make sure we have enough firewood, enough food. Fix anything that needs fixing before the first freeze." He glanced at her. "It'll be tight quarters. Long days with nothing to do but wait for spring." "Sounds perfect." Cole's mouth twitched. "You keep saying that." "Because I keep meaning it." They sat quietly for a while. Then Cole said, "You're different than when you first got here." Different how? Stronger, more sure of yourself. Less, he searched for the word, apologetic. Clara thought about that. He was right. She had been apologetic when she arrived. Sorry for existing, for taking up space, for being the woman nobody wanted. She wasn't sorry anymore. This place changed me, she said. Or maybe it just let me be who I already was. Either way, it suits you. Clara pulled the quilt tighter. Cole? Yeah? I'm glad you told me about your brother, about Sarah. I know it wasn't easy. It wasn't, but you deserve to know. He paused. I'm not good at this, at talking, at being close to people. So if I'm doing it wrong, you're not doing it wrong. How do you know? Because I feel the same way. And somehow we're making it work anyway. Cole looked at her, and in the starlight, his expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess we are. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of hammering. She stumbled out of bed, confused and still half asleep, and found Cole on the roof. What are you doing? She called up. Fixing this before you try to do it yourself and actually fall off this time. Clara couldn't help but smile. She made coffee and brought it outside, standing at the base of the ladder while Cole worked. You want help? She asked. Yeah. Hand me those shingles. They worked together through the morning, Clara passing materials up to Cole. Cole explaining what he was doing and why. By noon, the leak was fixed, and they both smelled like tar and sweat. You've got it in your hair again, Cole said, climbing down. Of course I do. But this time, when he helped her wash it out, Clara didn't pull away. She let him work the soap through her hair, let his fingers linger a moment longer than necessary. And when he was done, she turned to thank him and found him looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. Clara, he said, his voice rough. Yeah? But he didn't finish the sentence, just shook his head and stepped back, and the moment passed. Clara told herself it was for the best. They had a good thing here, a partnership, a friendship, something stable and real. No need to complicate it. But that night, lying in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her. Couldn't stop wondering what he'd been about to say. Couldn't stop wishing he'd said it anyway. The first snow came in early October, exactly like Cole had predicted. Clara woke to a world turned white and silent, everything muffled and strange. She pressed her face against the cold window glass and watched fat flakes drift down from a sky the color of old pewter. Cole was already up, already dressed, standing in the doorway of the barn and looking out at the weather with the resigned expression of someone who'd seen this before. Clara threw on her warmest dress and her coat and went outside. The cold hit her like a slap, stealing her breath. It's early, Cole said when she reached him. Even for up here. Is that bad? Depends on how long it lasts. If it melts off in a day or two, we're fine. If it sticks... He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. They spent the day preparing for the worst, moving firewood closer to the house, checking on the cattle, making sure they had access to the creek before it froze over, reinforcing the barn door so the wind wouldn't tear it loose. By evening, Clara's fingers were numb and her face felt like it had been scraped raw. But the work was done, and the house was warm, and there was stew bubbling on the stove. They ate in silence, both too tired to talk. When they finished, Cole built up the fire while Clara washed the dishes. The wind had picked up outside, howling around the corners of the house like something alive. Storm's getting worse, Cole said. Will we be okay? We'll be fine. House is solid. We've got food and water and fuel. He poked at the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. Might be stuck inside for a few days, though. Hope you're not sick of me yet. Not yet. That almost smile. Give it time. But 3 days later, when the snow finally stopped and they could dig their way out, Clara realized she'd enjoyed being trapped inside with him. They'd played cards with a battered deck Cole found in a drawer. Read aloud from Clara's books. Turns out Cole had a weakness for adventure stories, though he'd never admit it. Fix things that had been broken for months because there was finally time. And they'd talked, really talked, about everything and nothing. About Cole's brother. His name had been Thomas, and he'd been 2 years younger, and he'd laughed at everything. About Clara's grandmother, who taught her to sew and never once told her she should be quieter or smaller or less. about the lives they'd left behind and the life they were building together. When they finally stepped outside into the bright, snow-covered world, something between them had shifted again, deepened. Claire could feel it in the way Cole's hand would brush hers when they worked side by side, in the way his eyes would find her across a room, in the way the silence between them had stopped feeling empty and started feeling full. She didn't know what to do with it, wasn't sure she should do anything at all. By mid-November, the ranch was locked in winter. The creek froze solid. The cattle huddled together for warmth. The days were short and brutally cold, and Clara learned to dress in layers, wool and flannel, and anything else that would keep the chill out. She also learned that Cole had been downplaying how hard winter would be. The roof leaked again in a different spot. The stove started smoking, and they had to take it apart and clean out years of accumulated soot. One of the horses got sick, and Clara spent 2 nights in the barn with Cole, trying to keep the animal warm and hydrated. The horse lived, barely. Clara had never been so exhausted or so relieved. "You did good," Cole said as they walked back to the house in the pre-dawn dark. "Most people would have given up. She's a good horse. Wasn't going to let her die if I could help it." Cole stopped walking. Clara turned to look at him. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just—" He shook his head. "You're tougher than I thought, and I already thought you were pretty tough." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest despite the freezing air. "Thanks." They stood there in the snow, breath misting between them, and Clara had the sudden irrational urge to kiss him, to close the distance and see what would happen. But she didn't, just smiled and kept walking and tried to ignore the disappointment that settled in her stomach. December came with more snow and wind that cut like knives. They were snowed in for a week straight, living off stored food and melted snow and sheer stubbornness. Clara read all her books twice. Cole carved small figures out of wood, a habit he'd apparently picked up as a kid and never quite lost. They were good, detailed. A horse mid-gallop, a hawk with its wings spread. "You could sell these," Clara said, turning a carving over in her hands. "Don't want to." "Why not?" "Because then I'd have to make them for other people. Instead of just making them because I feel like it." Clara understood that. The need to keep some things just for yourself. She handed the carving back. Cole set it on the mantel next to the others. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The wind was too loud, the house too quiet beneath it. She lay in bed and listened to the storm and thought about everything that had happened since that day in the church. She'd been so sure her life was over, that being rejected by Joseph Hartley, being auctioned off like livestock, meant she'd never be anything more than a cautionary tale in Millfield Creek. But here she was, alive, strong, building something real with a man who saw her as an equal instead of a burden. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. It was better. Clara must have eventually fallen asleep because she woke to silence. Not just quiet, complete, absolute silence. She sat up, confused, and realized the wind had stopped. She got out of bed and went to the window. The world outside was blindingly white and perfectly still. Snow had drifted up against the house, nearly reaching the windowsill. "We're buried in." Clara jumped. Cole was standing in her doorway, already dressed, his hair still messy from sleep. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you." "It's fine." "What do you mean, buried in?" Snow's piled against the door. "We'll have to dig out before we can get to the barn." They spent the morning shoveling. The snow was deep and heavy, and Clara's back ached within an hour. But they kept at it, carving a path to the barn, then to the corral, then to the chicken coop. When they finally stopped for lunch, Clara could barely lift her arms. "You're shaking," Cole said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're exhausted." He guided her inside, sat her down at the table. "Stay here. I'll finish the rest." "Cole?" "Clara, you've been working for 5 hours straight. Let me handle it." She wanted to argue, but her body had other ideas. She slumped in the chair and watched through the window as Cole went back outside. When he came in an hour later, he looked as tired as she felt. But the work was done. The animals were fed and watered. They were set for at least another day. Clara made dinner, or tried to. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the pot. Cole took it from her. "Go sit down." "I can cook." "I know you can, but right now I'm cooking. Sit." Clara sat. watched Cole move around the kitchen with the same efficiency he did everything else. He was good at this, at taking care of things, at knowing what needed doing and doing it without fuss. She wondered if anyone had ever taken care of him. They ate the meal Cole had made, simple but good, and Clara found herself watching him more than eating, studying the way his hands moved, the way he'd push his hair back when it fell in his eyes, the scar through his eyebrow that she'd never asked about. "What?" Cole asked, catching her staring. "Nothing, just thinking." "About?" "About how I don't know anything about you. Not really. I know about your brother, about Sarah, but that's it. I don't know where you grew up, what your parents were like, how you ended up here." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his fork. "My father was a drunk," he said flatly. "Mean one. My mother left when I was 10. Didn't blame her. Thomas and I grew up taking care of ourselves mostly. When I was 18, I left, worked on ranches all over, saved money, learned the trade. Thomas stayed behind. When he died," Cole stopped, "I realized I didn't have anyone left, no family, no real friends, just me. So I came here." "I'm sorry." "Don't be, it was a long time ago." But Clara could hear the pain under his words, could see it in the way his jaw tightened, his shoulders went rigid. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I'm glad you came here. Otherwise, we never would have met." Cole looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression made Clara's heart kick against her ribs. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric. Clara wanted to say something, to push past whatever invisible line they'd been dancing around for weeks. But before she could find the words, Cole stood up. "I should check the fire," he said, and disappeared into the other room. Clara sat at the table and tried to calm the racing of her heart. Christmas came and went without ceremony. They didn't have decorations or special food or gifts, but Clara made an extra effort with dinner, used some of their precious sugar to make biscuits, opened one of the jars of preserves Mrs. Chen had sold them. Cole carved her a small bird, a sparrow, perfectly detailed, wings tucked against its body like it was resting. "I know it's not much," he said, handing it to her awkwardly. Clara turned it over in her hands, studying every detail. "It's perfect. Thank you." "I didn't get you anything." "You gave me a home. I think that counts." She set the sparrow on the windowsill in her room, where the light would catch it in the mornings. That night, they sat by the fire and drank the last of the coffee. It was a luxury they couldn't really afford, but it was Christmas, and some things were worth the expense. "What do you think happens next year?" Clara asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do we do this again? The same routine, the same work, the same quiet?" Cole considered this. "Probably. Unless you want something different." "No, I don't want different. I just..." Clara struggled to find the words. "I want to make sure you don't regret this. Regret me." "Clara, look at me." She did. "I don't regret you," Cole said. "I don't regret marrying you or bringing you here, or any of it. You make this place better. You make my life better. And if that ever changes, I'll tell you. But right now I can't imagine wanting anything different than this." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away, not wanting to cry on Christmas. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They went to bed not long after. But Clara lay awake for hours, thinking about what Cole had said, about how he'd looked at her when he said it, about how much she wanted to walk across the hall, knock on his door, and tell him that she didn't want to sleep alone anymore. But she didn't, because that would change everything, and she wasn't sure either of them were ready for that. January was the hardest month. The cold was relentless, and they ran low on firewood and had to ration it carefully. Clara's hands cracked and bled from the dry air and constant work. Cole developed a cough that wouldn't go away, though he insisted he was fine. They were both miserable and exhausted and sick of being trapped inside. One night, they had their first real fight. It started over something stupid. Clara had used the last of the good flour to make bread instead of saving it like Cole had asked. He'd come in from the barn, seen the bread, and snapped at her. "I told you to save that." "We needed bread. We needed that flour for trade. We're running low on supplies, Clara. We can't just use things up because we feel like it." "I wasn't using it because I felt like it. I was using it because we haven't had decent bread in weeks and I'm sick of eating hardtack." "Well, Maybe you should get used to hardtack because that's what we're going to be eating a lot more of now. Clara felt anger flare in her chest. Don't talk to me like I'm a child. Then don't act like one. The words hung in the air between them. Clara felt like she'd been slapped. Fine, she said coldly. I'll make sure to check with you before I do anything from now on. Wouldn't want to make decisions without your permission. She stormed off to her room and slammed the door. Sat on her bed, shaking with fury and hurt. An hour later, there was a knock. Go away, Clara said. Clara, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. No, you shouldn't have. Silence. Then, can I come in? Clara wanted to say no, wanted to stay angry, but she was tired of fighting, and the anger was already starting to fade into something more like sadness. Fine. Cole opened the door. He looked miserable. I'm sorry, he said again. I was frustrated about the supplies and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair. No, it wasn't. You're right. We needed the bread, and you were trying to do something nice, and I acted like a jackass about it. Clara sighed. I should have checked with you. I know we're running low. I wanted something normal, something that felt like home. Cole crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed. This is home, already. You don't need to prove anything. I know, but sometimes I feel like I'm not pulling my weight. Like you'd be better off if you'd married someone more useful. Clara, you're the most useful person I've ever met. You work harder than anyone I know. You never complain even when things are awful. You fixed that harness better than I could have. You saved that horse. He stopped. You make this place feel less lonely, and that's worth more than any amount of flour. Clara felt the tears coming again. This time she didn't try to stop them. I'm sorry I wasted the flour, she said. I'm sorry I yelled at you. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Cole reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he'd done that, just reached for her without a reason, without something practical to justify it. Clara squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. We're going to be okay, he said. I promise. How do you know? Because we've made it this far, and because I'm not letting you go without a fight. The words sent a jolt through Clara. She looked up at him, searching his face. Cole? But he was already standing, already pulling away. Get some sleep, he said. Things will look better in the morning. He left before Clara could say anything else. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what had just happened, of what he'd said, of the way he'd looked at her, of how badly she wanted him to come back. February brought a thaw. The snow started melting, turning everything to mud and slush. The cattle got restless. The chickens started laying again, and Clara could finally breathe without feeling like the cold was crushing her lungs. She and Cole fell back into their routine, but something had shifted after their fight. They were more careful with each other, more aware. Cole's hand would linger when he passed her things. Clara would catch herself staring at him when he wasn't looking. They moved around each other like dancers, always aware, always in sync. One afternoon they were in the barn together, mucking out stalls. It was dirty, miserable work, but the weather had finally cleared enough to make it possible. Clara was shoveling manure when she slipped on a wet patch of straw. She went down hard, landing on her back in a pile of muck. For a second she just lay there, stunned. Then she started laughing. She couldn't help it. It was too ridiculous. Cole appeared above her, looking concerned. You okay? I'm fine, just... She gestured at herself, covered head to toe in filth. This is disgusting. Cole's mouth twitched. Then he started laughing too. Deep, genuine laughter that Clara had never heard from him before. Here. He held out his hand. Clara took it. He pulled her up, and suddenly they were standing very close, both laughing, both covered in barn dirt. The laughter faded. Cole's hand was still in hers. Clara, he said quietly. Yeah? I need to tell you something. Her heart was pounding. Okay. I think I'm falling in love with you. The world stopped. Clara's breath caught in her throat. I know I shouldn't, Cole continued, the words tumbling out like he'd been holding them back for too long. I know this was supposed to be practical, not personal, but I can't help it. You're everything I didn't know I needed, and I don't want to keep pretending I don't feel this way. Clara couldn't speak, couldn't think, could only stare at him while her heart tried to beat its way out of her chest. You don't have to say anything, Cole said quickly. I just needed you to know. And if it makes things weird, if you want to go back to how things were, we can. Clara kissed him. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it. Just grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him down and kissed him like she'd been wanting to for months. Cole made a surprised sound, then kissed her back. His arms came around her, pulling her closer. He tasted like coffee and winter and home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. So, he said, I'm guessing you feel the same way. Clara laughed. What gave it away? Just a hunch. They stood there in the barn, covered in muck, holding each other. And Clara felt something settle into place inside her, something she hadn't even realized was broken. I love you too, she said. In case that wasn't clear. Cole smiled. That full, genuine smile she'd been trying to coax out of him for months. It was pretty clear, but I'm glad you said it anyway. They kissed again, slower this time. When they pulled apart, Clara was grinning. We should probably get cleaned up, she said. Probably. But neither of them moved. They just stood there, smiling at each other like idiots, until the cold finally drove them back inside. That night, Clara didn't sleep in her room. She slept in Cole's, wrapped in his arms, listening to his heartbeat, and wondering how she'd gotten so lucky. March brought the first real signs of spring. Ice broke up on the creek with sounds like gunshots. Green started pushing through the mud. The cattle ventured farther from the barn, restless after months of confinement. Clara woke each morning wrapped in Cole's warmth, and it still felt like something she might have dreamed. Like if she opened her eyes too fast, she'd find herself back in that red dress, standing in front of Joseph Hartley, being told she wasn't good enough. But then Cole would stir beside her, press a kiss to her shoulder, and the fear would dissolve like frost in sunlight. They were repairing fence on the north pasture when Cole brought it up. We need to go back to Ridgeway soon, he said, hammering a post into the softening ground. Running low on supplies again, and I need to pick up some things from the smithy. Clara's hand stilled on the wire she was stretching. Okay. Cole glanced at her. You don't sound okay. I'm fine. Just, last time didn't go so well. Sarah? Yeah. Cole set down the hammer and came to stand beside her. She doesn't matter. You know that, right? I know, but people talk. And if she's been talking, then let them talk. What do we care what a bunch of strangers think? Clara wanted to believe him. Wanted to be the person who didn't care about judgment or gossip or the way people looked at her. But months of isolation had made her soft in some ways, more vulnerable to the thought of facing the world again. What if we run into someone from Millfield Creek? She asked quietly. Cole's expression darkened. Then we deal with it, together. They finished the fence in silence. That night, Clara lay awake long after Cole had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to quiet the anxiety churning in her stomach. She thought about Joseph Hartley, about that moment in the church when he'd looked at her with such contempt, about the auction, about being weighed and measured and found wanting by an entire town. She'd worked so hard to move past it, to build something new here with Cole, but the thought of facing those people again, of seeing that judgment in their eyes, it made her feel like that scared girl in the red dress all over again. Cole's arm tightened around her in his sleep, and Clara forced herself to breathe. She wasn't that girl anymore. She'd survived a brutal winter. She'd learned to work a ranch. She'd fallen in love with a good man who saw her as an equal. She was stronger now. She just needed to remember that. They left for Ridgeway 2 days later. The roads were muddy and slow, and what should have been a 4-hour trip took nearly 6. By the time they reached town, Clara's nerves were stretched thin as wire. The main street looked the same as it had in November. A few more people out now that the weather had turned, but still quiet. Still the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. They stopped at the general store first. Mrs. Chen was there, same as before, reading the same newspaper, or one just like it. Cole, Clara, she said, looking up. Good to see you both. Thought you might be dead up there. Nearly were, Cole said. Rough winter. Always is in the hills. Mrs. Chen's eyes moved between them, sharp and assessing. Then she smiled slightly. You two look different. Different how? Clara asked. Happy. Married suits you. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. Cole just shrugged, but she could see the pleased expression he was trying to hide. They gathered supplies, flour, sugar, coffee, salt, seeds for the spring planting. Clara picked through the seed packets carefully, planning the garden in her head. Tomatoes, beans, squash, maybe some herbs if they could manage it. Mrs. Chen wrapped everything and made note of what they still owed. Coal would settle up after the cattle sale in the fall, same as always. Heard some news that might interest you, Mrs. Chen said as she tied up the last package. Joseph Hartley was through here a few weeks back. Clara's stomach tightened. Was he? Yep. Came with his new bride. Third wife, I think? Or maybe fourth? Hard to keep track. Mrs. Chen's expression was neutral, but her eyes were sharp. Pretty young thing. Looked terrified. He was ordering her around like she was a servant. Made quite a scene when she asked if she could look at the fabric. Cole's hand found Clara's back, steady and warm. Anyway, Mrs. Chen continued, they stayed at the boarding house overnight. Next morning, the girl was gone. Ran off in the middle of the night, apparently. Took a horse and just disappeared. Good for her, Clara said quietly. That's what I thought. Joseph was furious. Spent the whole day riding around looking for her, making accusations, threatening people. Sheriff finally told him to leave town or he'd lock him up for disturbing the peace. Mrs. Chen handed Cole the packages. Just thought you should know, in case you run into him. He's been in a foul mood, and from what I hear, he blames you for giving his wives ideas about running off. Me? Clara asked. You were the first one to walk away from him. Word gets around. Women talk. Mrs. Chen smiled. You'd be surprised how many of them thought what you did was brave. Clara didn't know what to say to that. She'd never thought of herself as brave, just desperate. They were loading the wagon when Clara heard the voice. Well, look who it is. She turned. Joseph Hartley was standing on the boardwalk across the street, arms crossed, that same smug expression on his face that he'd worn when he rejected her. Clara's stomach dropped. Cole stepped closer to her, his body tense. Keep walking, he said quietly. But Joseph was already crossing the street, clearly enjoying himself. He looked thinner than Clara remembered, his face drawn and tired, but his eyes held the same mean glint. Clara Whitmore, he said. Or I suppose it's Clara Mercer now. Heard you married some rancher and disappeared into the hills. That's right. Clara was pleased that her voice came out steady. Joseph looked her up and down with undisguised disdain. You look like you've been living rough. Guess that's what happens when you settle for desperation instead of quality. Cole's hand moved to Clara's arm, a warning. We're leaving. Oh, don't leave on my account. Joseph was grinning now, but there was something desperate in it. Something that didn't quite reach his eyes. I just wanted to tell Clara that she dodged a bullet. Can you imagine if I'd actually gone through with marrying her? What a disaster that would have been. You're the one who walked out, Clara said. Her voice was sharper now. You stood there in front of everyone and called me damaged goods. Because you are. Look at you. Hands like a field worker, skin burnt from the sun. You've gone completely feral. Joseph stepped closer and Clara could smell whiskey on his breath. You should be grateful I didn't marry you. Saved you from having to pretend to be a lady. Clara felt anger building in her chest, hot and fierce. For months, she'd carried the shame of that moment in the church. Had let his words define her, diminish her. But looking at him now, bitter, drunk, alone, she realized something. He was the damaged one, not her. You're right, she said, her voice steady and clear. I have gone feral. I work in the sun. My hands are rough because I actually use them. I fix fences and tend cattle and do real work instead of sitting around counting my father's money and driving away every woman unfortunate enough to marry me. Joseph's face reddened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? How many wives have run away from you now, Joseph? 3? 4? At what point do you look in the mirror and realize the problem isn't them? The problem, Joseph spat, is that women these days don't know their place. They get ideas. They think they can just leave whenever they feel like it. Maybe because you treat them like property instead of people, Clara said. She stepped closer to him, no longer afraid. You measured me like livestock that day. Decided I wasn't good enough based on things I couldn't control. And you know what? I'm grateful, because if you'd married me, I'd be just as miserable as all those other women. I'd be trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who sees me as an object. She gestured toward Cole. Instead, I'm with someone who treats me like an equal, who respects my opinions, who works beside me instead of ordering me around. So thank you, Joseph. Thank you for rejecting me. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Joseph's expression had gone from smug to furious. His hands clenched into fists. You think you're better than me? I think I'm free of you, and that's good enough. You're nothing, Joseph said, his voice rising. People on the street were stopping to watch now. You were nothing when I rejected you, and you're nothing now. Just another rancher's wife who'll be dead or broken by 40. At least my wives have the sense to run away before that happens. Cole moved so fast Clara barely registered it. 1 second he was beside her. The next he had Joseph by the front of his expensive coat, slammed against the side of the wagon hard enough to make the wood creak. Listen to me very carefully, Cole said, his voice dangerously quiet. You don't talk to my wife. You don't look at my wife. You don't even think about my wife. Because if I hear that you've been spreading your poison around about her, I will come back here and make you regret it. Understood? Joseph's face had gone pale. Up close, Clara could see the broken veins in his cheeks, the yellowing of his eyes. He looked older than his years, worn down by his own bitterness. You threatening me? Joseph managed. I'm making a promise. Cole released him with a shove. Now get out of here before I forget I'm trying to be civilized. Joseph straightened his coat, trying to recover his dignity, but his hands were shaking, and Clara could see the fear in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged, wasn't used to anyone standing up to him. This isn't over, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Yeah, it is, Cole said. It's been over since the day you walked out of that church. You just didn't know it yet. Joseph turned and walked away quickly, almost stumbling in his haste. Clara could see people on the street watching, whispering. But this time, she didn't feel humiliated. She felt powerful. She'd faced the man who'd rejected her, told him the truth, and he'd been the one to walk away. Cole turned to her. You okay? Yeah. Actually, I'm better than okay. Clara looked down the street where Joseph had disappeared. I stood up to him. I told him the truth. And it felt good. You did more than that. You made him look like the fool he is. Cole's expression softened. I'm proud of you. They finished loading the wagon in silence. Clara could feel the eyes on her, the whispers starting up again. But it didn't matter anymore. Let them talk. Let them judge. She knew who she was now. They were about to leave when someone else called out. Clara? This voice was different, hesitant, almost hopeful. Clara turned and felt her breath catch. Her mother was standing at the end of the street, looking older and smaller than Clara remembered. Her face was lined with new wrinkles, her hair more gray than brown. She wore a faded dress that Clara recognized from years ago. Mama, Clara said, the word coming out before she could stop it. Margaret Whitmore walked closer slowly, like she was approaching a wild animal. When she got close enough, Clara could see that she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, her cheeks blotchy. I heard you were in town, Margaret said. I wanted to see you. Why? Because you're my daughter. I stopped being your daughter the day you put me in that dress and sent me to marry a man I didn't know. Margaret flinched like she'd been slapped. I did what I thought was best. No, you did what was easiest. There's a difference. Clara's voice was hard, but she could feel emotion building in her chest. You sold me to save your land, and when that didn't work, you blamed me for it. Like it was my fault Joseph rejected me, like I'd failed you somehow. Clara, please, Margaret's eyes were bright with tears. I'm sorry. Your father and I, we've had time to think about what we did, how we treated you, and we're sorry. Where is he, Father? He couldn't come. He's ashamed. Margaret twisted her hands together. We lost the land anyway, 6 weeks after you left. Couldn't keep up with the payments. We're living in town now, in a room above the mercantile. Your father works there, sweeping floors, unloading supplies. Clara felt a complicated mix of emotions, satisfaction that they'd lost what they'd valued more than her, but also sadness. They were her parents, after all. She'd loved them once. I'm sorry to hear that, she said, and meant it. Are you? Margaret's voice was bitter. We lost everything because of you, because you couldn't just do what was expected. And just like that, The moment of sympathy evaporated. No, Clara said firmly. You lost everything because you made bad decisions. Because you borrowed money you couldn't pay back. Because you gambled everything on a marriage contract instead of finding another way. Don't you dare blame this on me. Margaret looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Clara's expression stopped her. She deflated, shoulders sagging. You're right, she said quietly. You're right. It's not your fault. None of it is your fault. She wiped at her eyes with a worn handkerchief. I wanted to see you. To know you were all right, and to say I'm sorry. For all of it. For the dress, for the marriage, for making you feel like you weren't enough just as you were. Clara felt her throat tighten. She'd wanted to hear those words for so long, but now that they were here, they felt inadequate. Too little, too late. I appreciate that, Clara said carefully. But it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase the hurt. I know it doesn't. Margaret looked at her daughter, really looked at her. You look well, happy even. I am happy. This man you married, he treats you well? Clara glanced at Cole, who was waiting by the wagon, giving her space but staying close enough to step in if needed. He treats me like an equal, like I matter, like my choices are worth something. Margaret followed her gaze. He loves you. I can see it from here. Yeah, he does. Clara felt some of the anger drain away, replaced by something closer to pity. I wish you and Father could have loved me like that, instead of loving your land more. We did love you. No, you loved the idea of me being useful, of me fixing your problems. That's not the same thing. Clara took a breath. I needed parents who would protect me, who would stand up for me. Instead, you threw me to the wolves and expected me to be grateful. Margaret was crying openly now. I don't know how to make this right. You can't. It's done, but... Clara paused, surprised by what she was about to say. But maybe someday we can start over. Not now. I'm not ready. But someday. Really? Maybe. I don't know. Ask me again in a year. It was more than Margaret deserved, and they both knew it. But Clara found she didn't want to carry the anger anymore. It was too heavy, too exhausting. Margaret nodded, accepting this small mercy. Can I write to you? Let you know how we are? If you want, send letters to Ridgeway. Mrs. Chen will hold them for us. I will. I promise I will. Margaret reached out like she might touch Clara's arm, then thought better of it. Her hand dropped back to her side. I'm glad you're happy, Clara. Truly. Even if we don't deserve to know it. She turned and walked away before Clara could respond. Clara watched her go, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Cole came up beside her. You want to go after her? No, I said what I needed to say. Clara took a shaky breath. Can we leave now? I'm done with this place. They climbed into the wagon. Cole took the reins, but before he could click the horses forward, more people appeared. Sarah, the Brennan brothers, a few others Clara recognized from that day in the church. They were gathering in the street, watching. Clara's stomach knotted. She dealt with Joseph. She dealt with her mother. But facing all of them at once. Ignore them, Cole said quietly. We're leaving. But Sarah stepped forward, blocking their path. She looked different than she had in November. Harder, somehow. Her pretty face was pinched with anger. So the damaged goods found someone desperate enough to take her, Sarah said loudly. How touching. A few people laughed. Clara felt her face heat. Cole's jaw tightened. Get out of the way. Why? Scared I'll tell your wife the truth about you? About us? There is no us. There hasn't been for 5 years. Only because you ran away. Like a coward. Sarah's voice rose. You could have had a good life, a respectable life. But instead you chose, what? To hide in the hills with some reject that no one else wanted? Clara felt something inside her snap. All the fear and anxiety she'd been carrying dissolved into pure white-hot anger. She stood up in the wagon and her voice came out strong and clear. You know what? She said, and everyone turned to look at her. I am damaged goods, but not because of anything wrong with me. I'm damaged because people like you, she pointed at Sarah, and him. She gestured toward where Joseph had gone. And everyone else who stood in that church and watched me get auctioned off like cattle. You damaged me. More people were gathering now, faces appearing in doorways and windows. Clara could see Mrs. Chen standing in the doorway of her store, arms crossed, watching. You took a scared young woman, Clara continued, and treated her like she was worthless, like she deserved to be humiliated. You whispered behind your hands and judged me for things I had no control over. You decided I wasn't good enough before you even knew me. She looked around at all of them, at the faces she recognized from Millfield Creek, at the strangers from Ridgeway, at everyone who'd ever made her feel small. But here's the thing, Clara said. I'm not worthless. I'm strong and capable, and I work harder than most of the men in this town. I've survived a winter that would have broken half of you. I've fixed roofs and mended fences and helped a sick horse survive when most people would have given up. I've built a life with a man who sees me as a partner, not property, and I'm happy, genuinely, truly happy. She looked at Sarah directly. So you can call me damaged all you want. You can whisper and judge and feel superior, but at the end of the day, I'm free. I'm living my life on my own terms, and you're still here, in this tiny town, making yourself feel better by tearing other people down. Who's really damaged? Silence. Clara could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel sweat on her palms despite the cool air. She'd never spoken like that in public, never said out loud what she really thought. It felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Then, from the doorway of the general store, Mrs. Chen started clapping, slowly at first, then louder, and then others joined in. Not everyone, plenty of people still looked scandalized or angry, but enough. Enough that Clara felt validation wash over her like warm water. Sarah's face had gone white, then red. You can't just... She just did, Cole said. He stood beside Clara, tall and solid. And now I've got something to say. He looked at Sarah with an expression Clara had never seen before. Not angry exactly, more like disappointed. You wanted respectability, Cole said. You wanted a nice house and social standing and someone who'd make you look good. But that was never me. I told you that. I was honest with you about what I wanted, and you said you were fine with it, but you weren't. You wanted to change me. I wanted you to be better, Sarah said. To be more than just some hermit in the hills. No, you wanted me to be different. There's a difference. Cole's hand found Clara's. Clara doesn't want me to be different. She likes me exactly as I am. Rough edges and all. And I like her exactly as she is. That's what love is supposed to be, accepting someone, not trying to fix them. He looked around at the gathered crowd. My wife deserves respect. She deserves to be treated with dignity and kindness. She's brave and strong and worth 10 of most people here. And anyone who can't see that is blind. He squeezed Clara's hand. Now, we're leaving. And if any of you have a problem with that, you can take it up with me. He helped Clara sit down, took the reins, and started to guide the wagon forward. Sarah stood in the street, tears running down her face, but she moved aside. They rode in silence for a long time. Clara's heart was still racing, her hands still shaking with leftover adrenaline. She couldn't believe what had just happened, standing up in front of all those people, saying out loud what she'd been thinking for months, having people actually applaud. That was incredible, Cole said finally. Clara let out a shaky laugh. That was terrifying. Yeah, but you did it anyway. He reached over and squeezed her hand. I'm so damn proud of you. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. Happy tears this time. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. You just needed to realize it. He paused. You know what I think we should do? What? Turn around. Clara looked at him in confusion. What? Turn the wagon around. Go back to town. Cole, we just left. I just gave that whole speech about being free. I know, but there's one more thing we need to do. Cole was grinning now, a wild, reckless grin Clara had never seen before. Trust me? Clara thought about it, about how far she'd come, about how she'd faced Joseph and her mother and Sarah and spoken her truth, about how there was nothing left to be afraid of. Always, she said. Cole turned the wagon around. When they got back to Ridgeway, there were still people on the street. They looked up in surprise as Cole and Clara returned. Some of them looked nervous, like they expected another confrontation. Instead, Clara jumped down from the wagon before it had fully stopped. She walked to the middle of the street, right there in the mud and the fading afternoon light. Then she held out her hand to Cole. "Dance with me," she said. Cole stared at her. "There's no music." "I don't care. Dance with me anyway." People were gathering again, confused. Sarah was there, looking furious and humiliated. Some of the people from Millfield Creek had stayed, and they watched with wide eyes. Cole climbed down from the wagon slowly. He walked to Clara and took her hand. "You're insane," he said quietly, but he was smiling. "Probably. Is that a problem?" "Not even a little bit." He pulled her close and they started to dance, right there in the middle of the street, with no music, just the sound of the creek and the wind and their own breathing. Clara had never danced before. Her mother had considered it frivolous, but Cole led her through it, his hand firm on her waist, his movements sure and steady. People were staring. Of course they were staring, that was the point. But Clara didn't care. She looked up at Cole and saw him smiling, really smiling, and she laughed, pure joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. "What are you laughing at?" he asked, spinning her. "This. All of it. The absurdity of dancing in the street just to prove a point." "Is it working?" Clara looked around, at the faces watching them, at Sarah's expression of pure shock, at the way some people had started to smile despite themselves, at how Mrs. Chen had come out of her store and was watching with obvious approval. "Yeah," she said. "I think it is." They danced until the song that only they could hear ended. Then Cole dipped her dramatically, making Clara shriek with laughter. When he pulled her back up, he kissed her, right there in front of everyone, a long, deep kiss that left no question about how he felt. When they broke apart, Clara turned to address the crowd one more time. "I was that girl in the red dress," she said, her voice carrying across the street. "The one nobody wanted. The one who got rejected and auctioned off and humiliated in front of her entire town. Some of you were there, some of you watched it happen, some of you even laughed." She paused, letting that sink in. "But that's not who I am anymore. I'm Clara Mercer. I'm a rancher's wife. I work hard, I speak my mind, and I'm loved. Really loved. By a man who chose me not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Not because I was the only option, but because he saw something in me worth fighting for." She looked directly at the people she recognized from Millfield Creek. "You all decided I wasn't good enough. You measured me against some impossible standard and found me lacking. But you were wrong. I was always enough. I just didn't know it yet." Her eyes found Joseph in the crowd. He'd come back, probably drawn by the commotion. He looked furious and embarrassed in equal measure. "You rejected me because you thought I wasn't worth your time," Clara said to him. "Because I was too tall, too rough, too independent. Because I didn't fit into your neat little box of what a wife should be. And I let that rejection define me for too long. I let it make me feel small and worthless." She smiled. "But you know what? I'm grateful. Because if you'd married me, I'd be trapped right now. Trapped in a life where I had to pretend to be someone I'm not. Where I had to shrink myself to fit your expectations. Instead, I'm free. Free to be myself. Free to love and be loved for who I actually am." She turned to look at Sarah. "And you. You tried to shame me today. Tried to make me feel less than. But it didn't work. Because I know my worth now, and it has nothing to do with whether you or anyone else approves of me." Clara took a breath. This was it. The moment she'd been building toward without knowing it. "I'm done being ashamed," she said to everyone. "Done apologizing for existing. Done shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. This is who I am. Take it or leave it. But either way, I'm done caring what you think." She walked back to Cole and took his hand. Then, in a burst of inspiration, she said, "Anyone else want to dance?" There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, to Clara's surprise, Mrs. Chen stepped forward. "Why not?" she said with a grin. She grabbed the hand of the man standing next to her, her husband, Clara realized, and they started dancing in the street. Then another couple joined, and another. Not everyone. Plenty of people still looked scandalized. But enough. Enough that the street turned into an impromptu celebration, people dancing and laughing in the mud. Sarah stood frozen, watching her attempt to humiliate Clara backfire completely. Then she turned and walked away quickly, head down. Joseph had already disappeared. But Clara barely noticed. She was too busy dancing with Cole, surrounded by strangers who'd somehow become allies, who'd seen her stand up for herself and decided to stand with her. They danced until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Then, finally, they climbed back into the wagon. This time, when they left, it felt final, like she was closing a door on that part of her life forever. They rode back to the ranch as darkness fell. Clara leaned against Cole's shoulder, exhausted and exhilarated and more herself than she'd ever been. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," Cole said. "I had a good teacher. I didn't teach you to stand up for yourself. You already knew how. You just needed permission to do it." He kissed the top of her head. "And watching you realize that, watching you step into your power, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you for turning the wagon around, for letting me do this my way. Always." When they got back to the ranch, the first thing Clara noticed was how different it looked. The snow was completely gone now. Green grass covered the hills. The cattle were scattered across the pasture, grazing peacefully. Wildflowers had started blooming, purple and yellow and white, dotting the landscape with color. The house, their house, sat solid and welcoming against the darkening sky. Smoke rose from the chimney, probably from the coals they'd banked that morning. It looked like home. They unloaded the wagon together, working in comfortable silence. When everything was put away, Clara went to check on the animals while Cole got a fire going. The horses nickered softly when she entered the barn. She gave them fresh hay and water, running her hands along their necks, checking for any problems. The cow they'd saved during the winter came up and butted her head against Clara's side, looking for attention. "Yeah, I missed you too," Clara said with a smile, scratching behind the cow's ears. Everything was as it should be. The animals were healthy. The barn was clean. This life she'd built with Cole was real and solid and good. When she went back inside, Cole had dinner started. Just beans and cornbread, nothing fancy. But it smelled like home. They ate in silence, both too tired for conversation. But it was a comfortable silence, the kind that came from knowing each other well enough that words weren't always necessary. After dinner, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. Clara wrapped herself in her grandmother's quilt, and Cole pulled her close. "What do you think happens now?" Clara asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we faced the past. We told them off. We danced in the street. What comes next?" Cole was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Now we live, we work the ranch, we survive another winter, we plant the garden and tend the cattle and fix whatever breaks. We build something that lasts." "That's it?" "That's everything." He looked at her. "Clara, we don't need grand gestures or big moments. We just need this, each other, the work, the quiet, the life we're building together. That's enough." Clara thought about that, about how she'd spent so much of her life wanting more, wanting different, wanting to be someone else somewhere else, and how she'd finally found everything she needed right here. "You're right," she said. "It is enough. It's more than enough." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. An owl called from the cottonwoods by the creek. The cattle lowed softly in the distance. The wind moved through the grass with a sound like whispered secrets. "Cole?" Clara said after a while. "Yeah? I'm glad you stepped forward that day. In the church. I'm glad you married me." "Me too." He pulled her closer. "Best decision I ever made. Even though I'm difficult and stubborn, and I argue with you about everything?" "Especially because of that." Clara smiled. "I choose you, every day, no matter what." "I choose you too, always." They went inside together when the cold got too sharp. The house was warm, filled with all the small touches that made it theirs. Cole's carvings lined the mantel, horses and hawks, and now a small figure of a woman dancing. Clara's books filled the shelf he'd built, spines worn from multiple readings. Her grandmother's quilt was folded at the foot of their bed. Their bed. Not his. Not hers. Theirs. That night, lying in the dark with Cole's arms around her and the sound of the wind outside, Clara thought about everything that had brought her here. The rejection, the humiliation, the fear, the shame, but also the courage, the growth, the love she'd found in the most unexpected place. She'd been so sure that day in the church was the worst day of her life, the day her world ended. But it hadn't been an ending at all. It had been a beginning. The beginning of becoming someone stronger, someone braver, someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't let anyone take it from her again. Clara Whitmore had stood in a church in a red dress and been told she wasn't enough. Clara Mercer knew better. She was more than enough. She was everything she needed to be, and that was worth more than all the approval in the world. Spring turned to summer. The garden Clara planted started producing more than they could eat, so they traded vegetables to Mrs. Chen for other supplies. The cattle grew fat on good grass. Cole fixed the porch step properly and patched every leak in the roof, and Clara learned to make bread that was actually edible. They worked side by side every day. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't, but they were always together, always in sync. Clara got a letter from her mother in June. It was short, awkward, full of news about town that Clara didn't care about. But at the end, Margaret wrote, "I'm proud of you. I should have said that before. I should have shown you. But I'm saying it now. I'm proud of the woman you've become." Clara cried when she read it, not because it fixed everything. It didn't. But because it was something. A small step toward healing. She wrote back, just a few lines about the ranch, about the garden, about being happy. She didn't mention Joseph or Sarah or the dancing. Some stories were hers to keep. July brought scorching heat. They worked in the early morning and late evening, resting during the hottest part of the day. Clara learned to appreciate the luxury of doing nothing, of just sitting in the shade with Cole and watching the world go by. In August, they took another trip to Ridgeway. Clara wasn't nervous this time. If anything, she was looking forward to it. Mrs. Chen greeted them warmly. "Heard what happened last time, the dancing. People are still talking about it." "Good things or bad things?" Clara asked. "Depends on who you ask, but most of the women thought it was wonderful. You've become something of a legend." Clara didn't know what to do with that. She'd never wanted to be a legend, just wanted to be herself. They ran into a few people on the street. Some ignored them, some nodded politely. One woman, young, maybe Clara's age, stopped her and said quietly, "Thank you for what you said about not being ashamed. I needed to hear that." Then she was gone before Clara could respond. "See," Cole said, "you're making a difference. I'm just living my life." Sometimes that's enough. They didn't see Joseph or Sarah. Clara was grateful for that. She'd said what she needed to say. There was nothing left between them. On the ride back, Cole said, "I've been thinking." About? About expanding, getting more cattle, maybe building a new barn, making this place really work. He glanced at her. "What do you think?" Clara thought about it, about putting down roots even deeper, about building something permanent. "I think we should do it," she said. "This is home. Might as well make it the best home we can." Cole smiled. "Yeah, that's what I thought too." Fall came with cooler temperatures and the knowledge that winter was coming. But Clara wasn't afraid this time. She knew what to expect, knew they could handle it together. They spent September and October preparing, cutting firewood, preserving food, making sure the house and barn were ready. This time, they had enough supplies. This time, they knew what they were doing. The first snow came in early November, just like the year before. But this time, Clara stood at the window and smiled. "Ready?" Cole asked, coming to stand beside her. "Ready," Clara said. They spent the winter working and reading and talking. They played cards and fixed things and made plans for the spring. And every night, Clara fell asleep wrapped in Cole's warmth, grateful for the life they'd built together. When spring came again, it felt like a new beginning. The snow melted, the grass grew, the cattle had calves, and Clara helped deliver them, marveling at the miracle of new life. One afternoon in April, Clara was working in the garden when Cole came out of the house with a strange expression. "What?" she asked. "Letter for you, from Ridgeway." Clara took it, confused. The handwriting was unfamiliar. She opened it carefully. Inside was a short note from a woman named Elizabeth. She explained that she'd been at Joseph Hartley's 4th wedding, she was a distant cousin, and had watched him reject another bride at the altar, just like he'd rejected Clara. But this time, Elizabeth had stood up and told him off, had said he was a coward and a bully, had told the bride she deserved better. "I thought you should know," the letter said, "that what you did, Standing up for yourself, speaking your truth, it inspired me to do the same. And it inspired that bride to walk away instead of accepting the scraps Joseph was offering. You started something, and I wanted to thank you for it. Clara read the letter twice, then handed it to Cole. Looks like you really did make a difference, he said softly. I just spoke up. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person willing to say the quiet part out loud, to show others it's possible. Clara thought about that, about the girl in the red dress who'd been too scared to speak, about the woman she'd become, strong enough to use her voice, brave enough to stand up for herself and others. I'm glad, she said finally. I'm glad it helped someone. She tucked the letter into her pocket and went back to her garden. There was work to do, life to live, a future to build. That evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set, Clara realized something. She'd spent so much of her life waiting for someone to see her worth, to recognize her value, to choose her. But she'd been looking in the wrong places. The person who needed to see her worth was her. The person who needed to choose her was her. And once she'd done that, once she'd recognized her own value and chosen herself, everything else had fallen into place. Cole hadn't saved her that day in the church. He'd given her the space to save herself. And she had. Clara Mercer looked out at the ranch she'd helped build, at the life she'd fought for, at the man who loved her exactly as she was. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not despite the rejection, not despite the humiliation, but because of it. Because sometimes the worst moments lead to the best beginnings, and sometimes being unwanted by the wrong people is the first step toward finding the right ones. Clara smiled, took Cole's hand, and watched the sun sink below the hills. She was home, and she was free, and that was everything.